They placed me in the basement office. Not with the analysts, not with the strategists, but in a cramped room with flickering fluorescent lights, a metal desk from the Cold War era, and a phone that rang for everyone but me. I didn't ask why. I already knew. It was the Pentagon's annual security briefing. The great Admiral James Patterson, 4-star commander of the Pacific Fleet, was delivering his assessment of emerging threats in the South China Sea. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. And there I sat, 7 floors below the action, organizing his PowerPoint slides and ordering sandwiches for a room I wasn't invited to enter. Make sure they're cut diagonally, his aide had instructed, not looking up from his phone. The Admiral prefers triangles. I reached for the lukewarm coffee in my government-issued mug, the one with the chipped rim and faded Department of Defense seal. My screen glowed with the presentation I had assembled over the weekend, the one with my analysis of satellite data showing unusual movement patterns among Chinese fishing vessels. The report no one had asked for, from the woman everyone called. Just the secretary. That's when my phone buzzed. Not the office line, but my personal cell, tucked inside my practical navy blazer. The message was encrypted, sent through channels only a handful of people had access to. I'd read it between bathroom breaks, just after submitting the lunch order for the 18th floor. Confirmation received. JSOC file verified. Your security clearance has been elevated. Director Clark en route to finalize appointment. I didn't look up at the ceiling, didn't imagine the faces of those who'd be standing in that room when I arrived. I just glanced at my screen one last time. Satellite imagery showing exactly what I'd predicted 3 months ago, when Admiral Patterson had laughed and said, "That's a creative interpretation, Eleanor. But let's stick to documented intelligence channels." I tucked my phone away, straightened the papers on my desk, and took a sip of bitter coffee. No fresh brew? Not yet. My name is Eleanor Hayes. I'm 42 years old. I started as a receptionist at the Defense Intelligence Agency after my military service ended with a knee injury. I built a pattern recognition algorithm in my apartment after watching footage of naval exercises that made no sense until you overlaid meteorological data. That algorithm now informs strategic decisions at the highest levels of government. They still think I take dictation, and I let them for now. The thing about being the analytical one in a family of military brass is that they love your support, but never your competition. When I was 12, I created a map of historical naval battles with color-coded outcomes based on weather conditions, fleet size, and tactical approach. It could predict victor accuracy within 78% if you entered the right variables. I was proud of it. I remember bringing it to the dinner table during our monthly family gathering, unfolding it beside my father's plate, and saying, "Look what I made. It shows why the British lost at Chesapeake Bay." My brother Marcus was already heading to Annapolis with a congressional recommendation and had just been featured in the local paper for his rowing championship. My sister Victoria was preparing her application to West Point with a perfect academic record and 3 varsity letters. Dad patted me on the head, cleared his throat, and said, "That's nice, sweetheart," before turning back to Marcus to ask about officer selection training. That moment never really left me. Not because it stung, though it did, but because it confirmed what I had already suspected. I was the supportive one, the organized one, the "she keeps the family Christmas card list" one. Not the warrior, not the leader. My family wasn't cruel. They came to my college graduation, nodded approvingly at my government job. But their approval always sounded like consolation, as if they were proud I'd found my level. When I completed my master's degree in information systems at night school, they said it was practical. When I told them I'd been selected for special training in intelligence analysis, they smiled politely and said, "The government always needs good administrative staff." At the Pentagon holiday party last month, watching my siblings receive handshakes from generals and ambassadors, I realized something that should have hurt, but somehow didn't. They never saw me because they never had to. I wasn't a failure. I was a fixture. Easy to rely on, easier to overlook. They loved the version of me that didn't challenge their worldview, I thought, organizing paper clips in my drawer that never seemed to stay organized. The version who kept her insights tucked away in encrypted files. The version who never asked for anything more than a basement office and a seat at the family Thanksgiving table. And maybe that's why I'd never told them about my algorithm, about the nights I spent analyzing surveillance data, about the pattern recognition breakthroughs, about the 300-page assessment I submitted through classified channels this morning. Because deep down I knew that invisibility was the only role they ever validated. And today I had brought that invisibility with me one last time, until Director Clark arrived. At some point between ordering sandwiches and preparing meeting notes, the conversation in the break room drifted to me. Not directly. No one ever addressed me directly about anything important, but in the way people talk around you, just loud. Enough to remind you of your place in the ecosystem. One of my cousins, Derek, who now worked as a defense contractor after washing out of the Naval Academy, leaned against the vending machine and said, "Doesn't Eleanor still work in admin or something?" He squinted like I was a half-remembered detail from a briefing. "I think she files reports or manages calendars, or was it travel arrangements?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The junior analyst beside him, fresh from graduate school with shiny shoes and a security clearance he wore like a medal, gave a slight shrug. "Wait, didn't she try for analyst training once?" My sister Victoria, overhearing from the coffee station, turned just slightly. "She did. But we're very proud of how she contributes in her own way. She's always been the type to work behind the scenes. We just wish she'd aim a little higher sometimes." She said it with genuine affection. A warm sisterly smile at the end softened the implication. But the message was clear. I was still supporting, still facilitating, still an afterthought. Marcus appeared at my desk then, holding a binder of classified materials he shouldn't have been carrying so casually. "Ellie," he said, his voice confident as always. "Good to see you made it in today. I know these big briefings must keep you busy with all the preparations." I nodded once, closing my analysis document before he could see it. "They're straightforward." He tilted his head, giving me that military smile that conveyed authority without warmth. "You've always been so detail-oriented," he said, emphasizing the last phrase as if it were a participation trophy. "I tell my junior officers about you sometimes, that not everyone needs to be on the front lines to serve." "I don't serve in the background, Marcus," I said quietly. "I serve where the work requires the lines move." He blinked. A flicker of something crossed his face. Confusion, dismissal, mild irritation. I turned back to my computer. "Intelligence doesn't always announce itself, Marcus. You just weren't trained to recognize it." He didn't respond right away, just gave another practiced smile and said, "Well, you always were good with words." Then he turned and headed toward the elevators, his polished shoes clicking on the linoleum. No one had asked what I'd been working on. No one had asked why I had requested satellite time or why I had been logging into the secure server at 3 a.m. for weeks. No one cared that I hadn't mentioned my security clearance upgrade because I'd been too busy tracking anomalous data patterns across the South China Sea. But they would care soon. I slipped out through the side hallway near the supply closet, past a row of filing cabinets and a water cooler that had been empty since Tuesday. The sounds of preparation faded behind me. Still meeting chatter, still praise for insights that weren't mine. I pulled out my phone as I leaned against the wall, its institutional beige paint chipped near the corners. The message had just come through. Encrypted. One of the few notifications that still triggered a slight tension in my shoulders. Not from fear, but from knowing the next few hours would reshape something fundamental. "Your presence is requested. Director Clark arriving in 14 minutes. Top floor briefing room." I stared at the screen a few seconds longer than necessary. Then I locked it and let the reality settle. My pattern recognition algorithm wasn't supposed to be anything more than a personal project, just a framework built from the frustration of watching intelligence get misinterpreted by people who trusted rank over insight. I'd been 35, freshly sidelined by an operations chief who called me clerical support, and barely acknowledged after having my analysis of North Korean shipping containers dismissed by someone whose name appeared in the press regularly. I built the first version in silence, coded between late shifts and Pentagon parking garage planning sessions, refined between budget meetings and transcription assignments. No grand presentations, no credit sought, just one iteration after another, one data set at a time. At first, it was just a basic correlation tool that could track vessel movements against weather patterns. Then came the behavioral analysis module. The satellite integration protocol, the machine learning algorithm that could detect deception patterns in official communications. And then the alert from a field operative who said my model had prevented an ambush in a contested region. That's when I knew it was real. I never told my family. Not when it was quietly adopted by a tactical unit. Not when the National Security Council requested a customized version. Not when the Third Allied Intelligence Service implemented it and we were silently added to Joint Task Force operations. Because the truth was, even if I had told them, they wouldn't have believed it was mine. They'd ask who really developed it. They'd ask which officer had supervised my work. They'd want to know if I'd finally been properly trained by someone with stars on their shoulders. So I let them believe I was still managing office supplies. A door opened down the hall and a junior staff member walked past with a stack of briefing books, nodding respectfully. I smoothed my skirt, checked that my security badge was properly displayed, and tucked the phone back into my pocket. 13 minutes. That's how long I had until Director Clark's car arrived and my name would be called to the briefing room where I'd never been invited before. I wasn't going to explain myself, but I would let them see me walk in. The lights dimmed as the briefing began. An aide distributed classified folders, and someone at the head table called the room to attention. Admiral Patterson stood, adjusting his uniform, his voice commanding and certain as he addressed a room still full of respect for his carefully constructed authority. "And I'd like to acknowledge my entire support team," he said, "from our strategic analysts to our administrative staff, including Eleanor, who has been invaluable in preparing today's materials." He gestured vaguely toward the back of the room where I now stood quietly with my access badge newly updated on my lanyard. A few polite nods followed, the kind people offer when acknowledging furniture. I nodded once. That was more than I usually received. Then, just as the Admiral began his assessment, it happened. The sound came first, footsteps, purposeful and unhurried, approaching from the main corridor. It shouldn't have been noticeable over the briefing, but somehow it was. Then came the subtle shift near the main entrance. 2 security officers straightened, exchanged glances. The Admiral faltered as heads turned, and then the door opened. Not dramatically, not with fanfare, just a practiced swing and the sudden presence of authority entering the room. Director Clark moved with the calm precision of someone who had spent decades making decisions that changed history. Gray suit, silver hair, eyes that missed nothing. No unnecessary words, no hesitation. Daniel Clark, Director of National Intelligence, had arrived unscheduled and unannounced. I didn't move. He walked straight through the room. Not rushed, not performative, just a presence cutting clean lines through decades of hierarchy. People instinctively stood. One of the junior officers lowered his tablet. Someone whispered, "Why is he here?" Director Clark stopped at the center of the room. He looked directly at Admiral Patterson. "I apologize for interrupting, Admiral," he said, his voice measured, authoritative, and just loud enough for everyone to hear. "But we have a situation that requires immediate attention." Then he turned toward where I stood. "Dr. Hayes," he said, "your presence is required. The Joint Chiefs are assembling now." My brother's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. My sister, seated near the front, went perfectly still, her eyes widening just slightly. A briefing book somewhere near the front fell to the floor with a slap against the carpet. No one moved to retrieve it. I stepped forward, my security badge already displaying its new clearance level. I didn't look at Marcus or Victoria or anyone else. I just nodded to Director Clark. "Yes, sir," I said. And then I walked past the tables, past the mounted screens displaying the very patterns I had identified months ago, past the stunned silence of people who had only ever seen me as a background character in their own narratives. The Admiral found his voice just as I reached the door. "Director, perhaps you could clarify." Director Clark turned slightly. "Dr. Hayes developed the pattern recognition system that identified the current situation. The Joint Chiefs are waiting for her assessment." He said it matter-of-factly, the way you might mention the weather. "Her algorithm has been running our early warning system for the past 8 months. Out the door into the corridor. Let them wonder. Let them replay every dismissive comment they'd made in the past decade. They thought I was a note-taker. Turns out I was national security." The elevator ride was silent but charged with purpose, the kind of quiet that precedes major decisions. Director Clark stood beside me, hands clasped behind his back, eyes forward. "Your analysis was correct," he said as we ascended. "Down to the exact coordinates and timeline." I nodded once, my mind already cycling through the implications, the probable next moves, the counter-responses that would need to be prepared. "The deception pattern was there for anyone who knew how to look," I said. "It wasn't hidden. It was just invisible to the wrong kind of attention." Director Clark's mouth curved in what might have been a smile on someone less reserved. "Precisely why you're now Deputy Director of Strategic Assessment." The elevator doors opened to the secure floor where America's most critical decisions were made. "They're waiting." I stepped into a room I had only heard about. The wood-paneled walls, the seal of the Department of Defense displayed prominently, the screens showing real-time information from around the globe. And around the table, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest-ranking military officers in the nation, all rose to their feet as I entered. The chairman nodded once. "Dr. Hayes," he said, "we've reviewed your assessment. Please brief us on your recommendations." My phone began vibrating before the briefing concluded. First came the texts. A cascade of notifications lighting up my silenced device. "Marcus, What just happened? Are you in trouble? Derek, yo, was that for real? What's going on? Victoria, first text, Eleanor, call me immediately. Victoria, second text, please explain. Dad, retired General Hayes, is everything okay? I stared at that one the longest. Not because it surprised me, but because it was exactly what I'd expected. Concern framed as confusion. As if I'd taken a wrong turn, not built something revolutionary. Director Clark glanced at me as we exited the briefing room 3 hours later. The president was impressed with your clarity, he said simply. The official announcement of your appointment goes out tomorrow morning. The press has already been notified. I looked down the long corridor, flags of military branches lining the walls. Not yet, I said. He waited, then nodded once. Understood. I turned my phone face down in my pocket. The silence felt cleaner than any explanation I could offer. What was there to say? The last time I mentioned I had developed something significant, a methodology for tracking subtle threat indicators, a prototype that was being tested, verified. Accuracy across multiple scenarios, they had smiled indulgently. Marcus said, everyone's doing data analysis now. Victoria said, you know that's not real intelligence work until it's field verified. My father had looked concerned and asked if I needed help finding a position more suited to my organizational talents. That was 3 years ago. So, no. I didn't know them a press release. I didn't know them a debriefing. Director Clark spoke again, softer this time. You navigated that perfectly. The assessment, the recommendations, the timeline. Let them adjust to who you've always been. I looked over at him and nodded slightly. They'll figure it out, I said eventually. And if they didn't, well, I hadn't built my algorithm for them anyway. 2 weeks after the briefing, Marcus appeared. On a military podcast, some leadership roundtable for rising commanders. I wasn't listening. A colleague sent me the link. He was polished, authoritative, the way only people with practiced confidence usually are. Eleanor's brilliant, he said. Smoothly, as if it were a fact he'd championed all along. We used to discuss intelligence methodologies when she was first developing her approach. I guided her thinking a little. Helped her understand the operational context. I closed the browser tab, turned back to the classified assessment on my screen. Then came Victoria. She sent a message to our family group chat, which had been silent since my appointment had been made public. Always knew my sister would make her mark, she wrote. I encouraged her to think bigger. I'm so proud she finally stepped up. Stepped up. They'd watched me climb a mountain blindfolded for years and never once acknowledged the altitude. So, I opened a secure document, not out of resentment, at least not the visible kind, just precision. The same way you finally correct a long-standing error after watching it propagate through the system. I authorized a single intelligence bulletin. No dramatic title, no personal vindication, just this, algorithm development timeline, the evolution of the strategic pattern recognition system. The documentation followed, original code samples, development milestones, the early tests run on historical data, timestamps from my secure server access, a recorded debrief from a field operator who said, Hayes's system gave us the critical 40-minute window we needed when traditional channels failed. I included one email from Marcus, dismissive, brief, sounds interesting, but have you run this by anyone with operational experience? Patterns aren't intelligence until they're confirmed by trained personnel. And a message Victoria once sent me after I mentioned applying for additional security clearance, don't overreach, Ellie. There's dignity in supporting the people doing the hard work. Not everyone needs to be in the spotlight. By morning, the bulletin had been distributed to every intelligence chief in the alliance. By evening, invisible intelligence was being discussed in secure briefings across 3 continents. Someone in the diplomatic corps messaged me, you just gave us a framework for recognizing what we've been missing in plain sight. I didn't reply. I didn't forward it. I just closed the file and went back to work. Let them try to rewrite history now. I had the documentation. The facility used to be an overlooked annex building. Now it pulses with focused energy, analysts hunched over specialized workstations, algorithms running across multiple screens, occasional murmured consultations when a pattern emerges. There's no prominent signage. No press releases about its function. Just a simple designation, Advanced Pattern Analysis Division. I established it quietly through official channels that kept my personal history separate from the authorization paperwork. It wasn't for recognition. It was for the analysts who kept getting told their insights were interesting but unproven, their methodologies unconventional, their conclusions premature. I knew that landscape better than I wanted to. I visit regularly, but never make announcements. I walked the secure floors, watched them develop new recognition parameters, build systems with project names like Horizon, Echo Chamber, and Deep Current. I never correct junior staff when they don't immediately recognize me. One Tuesday, as I reviewed a threat assessment near the back of the main analysis floor, a young woman perhaps 25 with close-cropped hair and intense focus looked up from her workstation. She studied me for a moment, leaned toward her colleague, and whispered something. Then she stood and approached. "You're Dr. Hayes," she said, not nervously, just directly. "The algorithm architect." I paused, then nodded. "Something like that." She straightened slightly. "I thought so." Then she gestured to her screen. "Would you look at what we're tracking?" I did. For the next 40 minutes, I listened as she explained how her team was developing a semantic analysis system that could identify deception patterns in diplomatic communications before traditional analysis would catch them. Her methodology was innovative. Her testing protocols were rigorous. She didn't know that 8 years ago, I wrote the first lines of code for my algorithm at my kitchen table, convinced no one with authority would ever listen. When I left that day, I didn't make a speech, just nodded and moved quietly through the security checkpoints, letting the sound of focused intelligence work continue uninterrupted behind me. No ceremonial farewells followed, but as I walked to my car, I thought about that analyst, her clear explanations, the way she didn't hesitate to present her findings. And I realized that was enough. You don't need validation to change history, just the persistence to see what others miss. I first learned the power of invisibility when I was 9. Not the comic book kind with rings or special suits, but the kind that comes from being a girl in a house full of military men. My father, General Robert Hayes, commanded rooms by merely entering them. His voice carried the weight of someone used to being obeyed. My brother Marcus already stood at parade rest during family photos, shoulders back, chin up, eyes focused on some distant horizon where his future success awaited. Even at 12, he knew how to speak with authority about things he'd only just learned. Then there was me, small for my age, with unruly hair that refused military precision and a mind that worked in patterns rather than orders. I could spot connections others missed, but in a family where command was currency, observation was merely a hobby. The day I discovered my superpower was an ordinary Tuesday. Dad had brought home 3 colleagues for dinner, all men with stern faces and decorated chests. Mom had prepared a roast that filled the house with the scent of rosemary and authority. The table was set with the good china, water glasses crystal clear and perfectly aligned like soldiers awaiting inspection. "Eleanor, bring the water pitcher," Mom called from the kitchen. I slipped from my room where I'd been building a rudimentary code system based on the patterns in Dad's military manuals. Grabbing the heavy glass pitcher, I moved carefully into the dining room where the men sat discussing deployment strategies for the Persian Gulf. I stood beside the table, invisible as wallpaper, and began filling glasses. "The intelligence is fragmented," said Colonel Winters, a man with silver hair and a perpetual frown. "We're making decisions based on incomplete pattern recognition." "That's the nature of field operations," my father replied. "You never have the full picture." I moved around the table, pouring water, completely unnoticed. "The satellite data from Sector 4 shows unusual movement," continued another officer. "But nobody can make sense of it. It's like looking at puzzle pieces from 3 different boxes." Something clicked in my brain. I'd been studying puzzle systems all week, how different patterns could be overlaid to reveal new information. I lingered by the sideboard, forgotten but listening. They continued discussing the problem, how troop movements in one area seemed disconnected from supply line adjustments in another, how weather patterns were affecting visibility but not in predictable ways. To them, it was chaos. To me, it formed a clear image. "It's a feint," I said quietly. The table went silent. For pairs of eyes turned to me, suddenly aware of my existence. "Eleanor," my father warned. "The adults are talking." "But Colonel." Winters tilted his head. "What did you say, young lady?" I swallowed hard. "It's a feint," I repeated. "If you overlay the 3 movement patterns and account for the weather, they're creating a distraction to the north while the real activity is happening to the southeast." The silence deepened. My father's expression darkened with embarrassment. "And how would you know that?" he asked, his voice tight. I shrugged. "It's like the chess problems you gave Marcus. If you watch the whole board instead of just the pieces that move the most, you see the real strategy." Colonel Winters looked at my father with raised eyebrows. "Robert, your daughter has quite an analytical mind." My father forced a laugh. "Eleanor has an active imagination. She should be finishing her homework, not eavesdropping on classified discussions." "But Dad, that's enough, Eleanor. Please help your mother in the kitchen." I nodded and Retreated, but not before I heard Colonel Winters say, "You might want to nurture that talent, Robert. Natural pattern recognition like that is rare." My father's response was lost as the kitchen door swung closed behind me, but his expression had already told me everything. My insight wasn't welcome. It disrupted the order of things. 3 weeks later, news reports confirmed unusual military activity exactly where I'd predicted. I cut the newspaper article out and kept it hidden in my desk drawer, my first piece of evidence that being unseen had advantages. People revealed truths around you when they forgot you were there. By high school, I had perfected the art of strategic invisibility. I wasn't unpopular or ignored completely, I was simply categorized. Eleanor's the organized one, teachers would say. So helpful with administrative tasks. While other students fought for spotlight roles and presentations, I volunteered to compile the research, organize the slides, handle the logistics. Not because I couldn't lead, but because from the background, I could see everything. In my junior year, our school hosted a Model United Nations. Marcus, home from his first year at Annapolis, helped me prepare. "You should aim for something manageable," he advised as we sat at the kitchen table. "Maybe the secretary role for a smaller committee. That plays to your strengths." "I was thinking of representing Russia in the Security Council," I said, looking up from my notes. "I've been studying their voting patterns and diplomatic language shifts." Marcus smiled with that particular blend of affection and dismissal he'd perfected. "That's ambitious, Ellie. Those positions go to the debate team captains. You're not really the commanding presence type." "What type am I?" I asked, already knowing his answer. "You're detail-oriented. Organized. You make sure things run smoothly behind the scenes." He ruffled my hair like I was still 9. "That's important too." I got the secretary role, as expected. But during the conference, when the student playing the Russian delegate fell ill, I stepped in with my meticulously prepared notes. The faculty advisor, Mrs. Chambers, watched with surprise as I navigated complex diplomatic scenarios with precision, anticipating arguments before they were made, connecting seemingly unrelated policy positions into coherent strategies. Afterward, she asked, "Why haven't you been on the debate team, Eleanor?" I shrugged. "No one ever suggested I should be." "You have an unusual talent for strategic thinking," she said. "You should consider a career in intelligence analysis." That night at dinner, I mentioned Mrs. Chambers' comment. Victoria, home from her first semester at West Point, laughed. "Intelligence? That's basically glorified secretarial work with a security clearance. You'd be stuck in a basement sorting through reports while the real decisions get made upstairs." "It's not like that," I objected. "Analysts shape how information is understood." Sure, she interrupted. "But at the end of the day, they brief the commanders who make the actual decisions." She turned to my father. "Right, Dad?" He nodded, passing the potatoes. "Intelligence is support staff, Eleanor. Important, certainly, but not where leadership happens. If you're interested in government work, consider something in administration. You've always been good at keeping things organized." I looked down at my plate, rearranging my food into pattern quadrants. "Maybe I could do both." My mother patted my hand. "Of course you could, sweetie. But let's be realistic about your strengths." And so it continued through college. I double majored in information systems and international relations, graduating with honors that my family acknowledged with polite applause and immediate questions about stable employment prospects. When I announced I'd accepted an entry-level position at the Defense Intelligence Agency, my father nodded with moderate approval. "That's sensible," he said. "Government benefits are excellent, and you can build a solid career there." What he meant was, "You found your level. Appropriate, manageable, and safely away from the real action." My first desk at the DIA was exactly what they expected, tucked away in a windowless room with fluorescent lighting that hummed like judgment. I processed intelligence reports, formatted briefing documents, managed databases of information. That flowed upward to analysts who then briefed decision-makers. I was 3 levels removed from anyone who might recognize what I saw in the data. During my second year, a minor crisis emerged involving shipping containers moving through the Strait of Malacca. The pattern seemed random to most: weather delays, mechanical issues, rerouting due to local port congestion. But I saw something else. After my shift ended, I stayed late, pulling shipping manifests, comparing them against weather data, port capacity reports, and local news. By morning, I had compiled a report showing a deliberate pattern of delay and diversion that corresponded with missing inventory from 3 different military installations in the region. I submitted it through proper channels, attaching it to the daily intelligence summary that went to the Southeast Asia desk. 3 days later, my supervisor called me into his office. Eleanor, he said, not unkindly, I appreciate your enthusiasm. But we have established analysis protocols. Your report wasn't requested, and it's created some confusion upstairs. But the pattern is clear, I insisted. If you overlay the shipping data with the inventory reports, that's not your job. He interrupted. Your support staff. Your role is to process and organize information, not analyze it. But I found something important. He sighed. Look, I'm trying to help you here. People don't appreciate when someone steps outside their lane. Especially someone at your level. I returned to my desk, but the pattern kept nagging at me. That night, I reformatted my analysis, removed my name, and sent it through an anonymous tip channel to a different department. 2 weeks later, a security team intercepted 3 shipping containers carrying stolen military equipment. The director sent out a commendation to the analysis team that had identified the pattern. My name wasn't mentioned. I should have been disappointed, but instead, I felt something unexpected: power. I had seen what others missed, and I had found a way to make it matter. If invisibility was my assigned role, perhaps I could use it to my advantage. That became my strategy. I did my assigned job impeccably, organizing, formatting, supporting. But after hours, I studied. I taught myself advanced pattern recognition algorithms, statistical analysis, predictive modeling. I enrolled in night classes for my master's degree in information systems with a focus on intelligence applications. I built small programs that could identify anomalies in data sets too large for human analysts to process effectively. When I finished my degree, I applied for the official analyst training program. My supervisor wrote a lukewarm recommendation. Eleanor is extremely organized and reliable in her administrative duties. The selection committee passed me over. Twice. At family gatherings, Marcus and Victoria shared stories of their advancing careers. Marcus was now a lieutenant commander on a nuclear submarine, making decisions that could alter global security in minutes. Victoria had completed 2 tours in Afghanistan and was being fast-tracked for command positions. I brought potato salad and kept the conversation flowing when tensions rose. What about you, Ellie? My aunt would inevitably ask. Still with the government? Still at the DIA, I'd confirm. Working in intelligence. She manages information systems, my father would clarify, as if to prevent misunderstanding. Make sure the right reports get to the right people. What none of them knew was that I had started building something in my apartment. A pattern recognition system that could process massive data sets across seemingly unrelated domains, shipping manifests, weather patterns, financial transactions, communications metadata, and identify correlations that human analysts might miss. I called it Cassandra, partly for the mythological prophet no one believed, and partly because the acronym worked: Complex Adaptive System for Strategic Analysis and Network-Driven Response Assessment. I tested it first on historical datasets. Known security incidents where the warning signs had been missed until too late. Cassandra found the patterns days, sometimes weeks earlier than human analysts had. Next, I applied it to current data, identifying 3 potential security concerns that hadn't yet appeared on official radar. I couldn't submit these findings through normal channels. I'd already been warned about staying in my lane. Instead, I created a secure anonymous submission protocol, routing my analysis through systems that couldn't be traced back to me. Over 6 months, Cassandra's warnings led to the prevention of a planned attack on a military installation, the identification of a previously unknown smuggling network, and early detection of a cyber infiltration attempt. Each success was credited to excellent intelligence work by the official analysis teams. Each time, I watched from my basement office as commendations were distributed to people who had simply acted on information they hadn't generated. I told myself it didn't matter who got the credit, only that the threats were stopped. But something was shifting inside me. The quiet satisfaction of knowing was no longer enough. The system I'd built was saving lives, preventing crises, strengthening security, and no one knew. Worse, my career remained stagnant. I was still just a secretary. In the eyes of my colleagues, my family, the entire structure I served. Then came the South China Sea incident. Chinese fishing vessels had been moving in unusual patterns for weeks. Official analysis dismissed it as normal commercial activity responding to changing fishing conditions. But Cassandra detected something else, a coordinated movement pattern that corresponded with gaps in satellite coverage and coincided with unusual underwater acoustic signatures. I compiled the analysis, more comprehensive than anything I'd submitted before. This wasn't just a potential security concern, it was evidence of a covert operation designed to establish territorial control while avoiding detection. I hesitated before sending it through my anonymous channel. This was too important for the usual route, where it might be lost among dozens of other intelligence reports. Instead, I took a risk. I packaged the analysis, removed any indication that it came from Cassandra, and sent it directly to Admiral Patterson's secure server with routing that made it appear to come from an authorized intelligence unit. It was crossing a line, potentially a career-ending move if traced back to me. But the pattern was too clear, the implications too serious to ignore. 3 days passed with no response. On the 4th day, I was called to Admiral Patterson's office. Not to discuss my analysis, but to prepare slides for an upcoming briefing on the South China Sea situation. I sat across from him, taking notes as he outlined what he wanted: standard formats, conventional assessments, nothing that would rock the boat diplomatically. "Sir," I ventured cautiously, "has there been any unusual activity detected among Chinese vessels in the region?" He glanced up, annoyed at the question. "Nothing significant. Some fishing fleet movements, but that's routine." "What about the pattern of movement that corresponds with satellite coverage gaps?" His eyes narrowed. "Where did you hear about that?" I read the intelligence reports, sir. Part of my job is to organize them." "Well, you should stick to organizing. That analysis was speculative at best. Creative interpretation by someone who doesn't understand the operational reality of the region." I nodded, retreating to safer ground. "Of course, sir. I'll have the slides ready by tomorrow." That night, I made a decision. If the official channels wouldn't listen, I needed to find someone who would. I compiled all of Cassandra's data on the South China Sea situation, along with documentation of the system's methodology and previous successes, credited to others. I encrypted it and sent it through a secure channel directly to the Office of the Director of National Intelligence with one addition: my name, rank, and security clearance level. It was the professional equivalent of stepping off a cliff. Best case, I'd be reprimanded for circumventing the chain of command. Worst case, I'd lose my security clearance and my career would be over. But the pattern was real, and someone needed to see it. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. I continued preparing slides, ordering sandwiches, and maintaining my invisibility. Then one Thursday morning, I received a message requesting my presence at a security office I'd never visited before. My heart raced as I rode the elevator to a floor that required special clearance to access. A stern-faced security officer met me and led me to a windowless room with a single table and 2 chairs. "Wait here," she instructed, closing the door behind her. I sat alone for 17 minutes, according to the clock on the wall. When the door opened again, a woman I didn't recognize entered. She wore civilian clothes, but her posture and bearing screamed military background. "Miss Hayes," she said, sitting across from me. "I'm Colonel Diane Richards, Office of Special Intelligence Review. Do you know why you're here?" I straightened in my chair. "I believe so. You developed an unauthorized intelligence analysis system, deployed it using classified data without approval, and circumvented the entire intelligence hierarchy to send your conclusions directly to the DNI's office." Her face revealed nothing. "Is that assessment accurate?" "Yes, ma'am." "And what did you think would happen when you did this?" I met her gaze directly. Best case, someone would take the analysis seriously and investigate the pattern I identified. Worst case, I'd be fired and possibly prosecuted for mishandling classified information. "And you proceeded anyway?" "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" "Because the pattern is real. And because lives could depend on someone seeing it." She studied me for a long moment, then placed a folder on the table between us. "We've reviewed your analysis. And we've reviewed Cassandra." My heart sank. They had traced it back to me completely. "Your system," she continued, "has identified patterns that our best analysis teams missed. Its methodology is sound, its predictions have proven accurate, and its potential applications are significant." I blinked, uncertain where this was going. "Miss Hayes, do you know what happens to people who break the rules in intelligence work? They get disciplined. Or fired." "Usually, yes." She leaned forward slightly. "But occasionally, very occasionally, they get promoted." She opened the folder and slid a document across to me. It was a security clearance upgrade authorization, signed by the Director of National Intelligence himself. "Congratulations, Dr. Hayes. You've just been appointed to the Advanced Threat Assessment Division. Your first assignment is to fully implement Cassandra across our intelligence architecture." I stared at the document, unable to process what was happening. "The DNI recognizes talent when he sees it," Colonel Richards continued. "Even when it comes through unconventional channels. Or perhaps especially then. My current supervisors will be informed that you've been reassigned. They don't need to know where or why." I looked up at her. "And Admiral Patterson?" A hint of a smile crossed her face. "Will be briefed on Cassandra's findings regarding the South China Sea situation." Buy you, in person, next week. As I left the security office, security badge now displaying a clearance level I'd never expected to hold, I felt strangely calm. The invisibility I'd cultivated for years had become my greatest asset. I had watched, listened, and built something powerful from the shadows. Now it was time to step into the light. The week before I was scheduled to brief Admiral Patterson, I received a call from my mother. It was Sunday evening, and I was in my apartment, surrounded by data visualizations and presentation drafts, preparing for the most important professional moment of my life. "Eleanor, darling," she began, her voice carrying that particular blend of warmth and obligation that defined our relationship. "We're having a small gathering next Saturday for your father's birthday. Just family and a few close colleagues. You'll be there, won't you?" I glanced at my calendar, where next Saturday was blocked off for final Cassandra system integration tests. "I might have to work, Mom." "Work?" She said it with gentle disbelief. "Surely they don't keep you filing papers on weekends." "This is important, Eleanor. Your father is turning 65. General Mitchell and Admiral Holbrook will be there." I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar pressure of expectations unaligned with reality. For 20 years, I had attended family gatherings where my achievements were footnotes, my work reduced to filing papers, my insights treated as interesting hobbies. Part of me wanted to say, "Actually, Mom, I'll be implementing a national security system that will transform how we identify threats," but the words wouldn't come. "I'll try," I said instead. "That's my girl. Victoria is bringing her new promotion certificate to show your father. And Marcus might have some exciting news too." Of course they did. The visible children with visible accomplishments. "I'll bring a cake," I offered, falling back into my assigned role. "Perfect. You always know just what to do to make things special." After we hung up, I stood at my window overlooking the Potomac, watching the last light fade from the sky. For years, I had accepted invisibility as my condition, even leveraged it to build something extraordinary. But now, on the verge of stepping into a role I had earned through my own brilliance, I found myself automatically retreating back into the shadows at the first family summons. Colonel Richards had warned me about this during our second meeting. "The hardest part won't be the technical challenges or even the institutional resistance," she'd said. "It will be recalibrating how you see yourself. You've survived by being overlooked. Success will require you to be seen." The following morning, I arrived at the Pentagon 2 hours early. The building felt different at 6 a.m., quieter, more honest somehow, without the performance of importance that filled its corridors during regular hours. I made my way to the small office I'd been assigned in the Advanced Threat Assessment Division, a space I still couldn't quite believe was mine. On my desk sat a sealed folder marked ultra-classified. Inside was the final security protocol for Cassandra's integration into the national intelligence architecture, along with my new credentials: Deputy Director of Strategic Assessment, reporting directly to the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Deputy Director. The title still felt foreign, like clothing borrowed from someone else's closet. I ran my finger over the embossed seal, remembering all the times I'd been told to aim lower, to accept less, to find fulfillment in supporting others' greatness. My phone buzzed with a message from Colonel Richards: "Briefing room secured for 0900, Joint Chiefs representatives confirmed attendance." I felt a flutter of anxiety. The Joint Chiefs, the highest-ranking military officials in the country, would be there to hear me present Cassandra. People like my father, who had never believed I could operate at this level. As I organized my presentation materials, my mind drifted to the first time I'd tried to show my father a pattern I'd identified. I was 12, and I'd noticed something in his military history books, a correlation between supply line configurations and battle outcomes that seemed consistent across centuries of warfare. I'd created a simple visualization, excited to share my discovery. "That's interesting, honey," he'd said, barely glancing at my carefully drawn charts. "But military strategy is more complicated than patterns in a book. Real command decisions aren't made by looking at graphs." 27 years later, I was about to prove him wrong in the most definitive way possible. The thought should have been satisfying, but instead, it filled me with a strange melancholy. Why did I still crave validation from people who had never seen me clearly? At precisely 8:45, I gathered my materials and made my way to the secure briefing room. Colonel Richards was waiting outside. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded, though my heart was pounding. "Remember," she said quietly, "you're not asking for their approval. You're providing them with critical intelligence they didn't have before. You belong in that room." The briefing room was imposing, wood-paneled walls, the seal of the Department of Defense mounted prominently, screens displaying classified global security status reports. Around the large oval table sat 12 people, each representing the highest levels of military and intelligence leadership. I recognized Admiral Patterson immediately. He sat near the head of the table, his chest decorated with ribbons and medals, his expression one of barely concealed impatience. He had no idea why he'd been summoned or who I was beyond the administrative assistant who prepared his slides. Colonel Richards entered first. "Good morning," she announced. "Thank you for your attendance at this priority briefing. I present Dr. Eleanor Hayes, Deputy Director of Strategic Assessment." I walked in behind her, wearing a confidence that didn't entirely belong to me yet. Admiral Patterson's expression shifted from impatience to confusion as he registered my face. I saw the moment he placed me, his eyes narrowed slightly, his posture stiffened with surprise. "Dr. Hayes will be briefing us on a critical intelligence system being implemented across our security architecture, codenamed Cassandra. This system has already identified multiple security threats that conventional analysis missed, including the current situation in the South China Sea." I took my place at the podium, setting down my materials with steady hands. "Thank you, Colonel Richards." I looked around the room, meeting each pair of eyes briefly. Cassandra is a pattern recognition system I developed to identify correlations across seemingly unrelated data domains. It has proven particularly effective at detecting deception operations designed specifically to evade traditional intelligence methods. For the next 45 minutes, I presented Cassandra, its methodology, its successful predictions, its application to the South China Sea situation. I showed how Chinese vessels were creating a deliberate pattern of movement timed precisely to satellite coverage gaps, how underwater acoustic signatures indicated submarine activity disguised by surface vessel noise, how all of this aligned with specific diplomatic language shifts in official communications. As I spoke, I watched Admiral Patterson's expression transform from skepticism to grudging attention to genuine engagement. By the time I concluded with Cassandra's assessment of imminent territorial incursion plans, he was leaning forward, entirely focused on the data before him. "Questions?" I asked, concluding my presentation. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs spoke first. "Dr. Hayes, your analysis contradicts 3 separate intelligence assessments from established channels. What makes you confident in these conclusions?" "Because Cassandra doesn't rely on human interpretation until the final stage," I explained. "It identifies patterns across data sets too vast for human analysts to process comprehensively. The correlations I've shown you aren't theories, they're mathematical certainties." Admiral Patterson cleared his throat. "I'm familiar with the intelligence reports on Chinese vessel movements. They indicate normal commercial activity." "Yes, sir," I replied. "That's precisely what they're designed to indicate. The deception is in creating a pattern that appears normal when viewed through conventional analytical frameworks. Cassandra is designed to see through exactly this kind of operational camouflage." "And you developed this system, where? When?" he asked, his tone suggesting he still couldn't quite reconcile the woman standing before him with the administrative assistant who had ordered his sandwiches. "I began development 5 years ago, working independently. The system has been under evaluation by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence for the past 3 months." Another officer spoke up. "If this assessment is accurate, we need to adjust our entire strategic posture in the region immediately." "That would be my recommendation," I confirmed. The room fell silent as the implications settled. Then the chairman nodded once. "Thank you, Dr. Hayes. Your assessment will be integrated into our strategic planning effective immediately. Please ensure continuous updates as Cassandra processes new data." "Yes, sir." As the briefing concluded, I gathered my materials, aware of Admiral Patterson's eyes on me. He approached as the others filed out. "Hayes," he said, his voice lower. Then in the briefing, "I'm not sure I understand. You've been in administration for years." "Yes, sir. While developing Cassandra." "Why didn't you come through proper channels with this?" I met his gaze directly. "I did, sir. 3 times. Each time, I was told to stay in my lane." He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Well, it seems your lane has changed." "No, sir," I replied quietly. "Your perception of it has." As I left the briefing room, Colonel Richards fell into step beside me. "That," she said with understated admiration, "was masterfully done. Thank you. The DNI wants to see you. Now." My pulse quickened. Is there a problem? Quite the opposite. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence occupied a space of near-mythic significance in my professional universe. For years, it had represented the unreachable apex of the intelligence community, a place where strategic decisions of national importance were made by people with gravitas and authority I could hardly imagine possessing. Now I was being escorted through its corridors, past security checkpoints that required clearance levels I'd only recently acquired, toward the inner sanctum of intelligence leadership. Colonel Richards left me at the final security checkpoint. "He's waiting for you," she said. "Remember what I told you. You belong here." Director Clark's office was unexpectedly austere, functional rather than impressive, with maps and screens displaying global information feeds rather than the typical power decorations of high office. The man himself stood as I entered, a tall figure with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to process information at an accelerated rate. "Dr. Hayes," he said, extending his hand. "Your Cassandra briefing was transmitted to me in real time. Impressive work." "Thank you, sir. Please, sit." He gestured to a chair across from his desk. "I've been reviewing your file. Both the official version and the real one." I tensed slightly. "Sir? Your official personnel file says you've been in administrative support roles for 15 years, with consistently positive but unremarkable performance evaluations." He leaned back, studying me. "Your actual work, the anonymous intelligence contributions, the pattern recognition innovations, the Cassandra development, tells a different story. A story of extraordinary talent deliberately hidden." "Not hidden, sir. Just unacknowledged." "Why? Why continue for years in a role far below your capabilities?" It was a question I'd asked myself countless times. Initially because I had no choice. Later, because operating from the shadows offered certain advantages. People reveal more when they think you're just processing their paperwork. A hint of a smile touched his face. "The invisibility advantage. I understand it well. I started my career in signals intelligence, another field where brilliance often goes unrecognized." He leaned forward. "But there comes a point where remaining unseen becomes a liability rather than an asset. For you, that point is now." He pushed a folder across the desk to me. "The President has been briefed on Cassandra and its implications for national security. He's authorized immediate implementation across all intelligence services, with you as program director." I opened the folder to find official authorization documents bearing the presidential seal. Additionally, Director Clark continued, "In light of the South China Sea assessment, he's requested your presence at a National Security Council meeting tomorrow morning. The Joint Chiefs will be there." My mind raced with the implications. Tomorrow is Saturday. National security doesn't observe weekends, Dr. Hayes. He regarded me with that penetrating gaze. "Is there a problem?" I thought of my mother's call, my father's birthday gathering, the cake I'd promised to bring. The lifetime of showing up for people who had never truly shown up for me. "No, sir. No problem." "Good. A car will pick you up at 0700. As I left the DNI's office, my phone vibrated with a message from my sister. "Don't forget Dad's birthday tomorrow. Mom's counting on your chocolate cake." I paused in the corridor, feeling the weight of colliding worlds. For decades, I had maintained the compartmentalization that allowed me to be Eleanor the supportive daughter and Ms. Hayes the invisible administrator. Now Dr. Hayes the deputy director was emerging, demanding recognition not just from colleagues but from family who had never seen her before. I typed a response, "Can't make it. National security matter." Victoria's reply came seconds later, "Very funny. Seriously, Mom's expecting you." I didn't respond. For the first time, I didn't need to explain or apologize or accommodate. The work I was doing actually was a matter of national security, and it took precedence over birthday cake and family expectations. That evening, as I prepared for the National Security Council meeting, reviewing Cassandra's latest data and refining my presentation points, my phone rang repeatedly. First my mother, then Victoria, finally my father. I let them all go to voicemail. Whatever they needed, reassurance, cake, the comfort of familiar family dynamics, would have to wait. The patterns Cassandra had identified couldn't. At 6:45 the next morning, I stood outside my apartment building, briefcase containing classified materials in hand, waiting for my government transport. The sky was just beginning to lighten, the air crisp with early spring coolness. My phone had finally stopped ringing around midnight, though the voicemails continued to accumulate. I hadn't listened to them. The black SUV arrived precisely on time, a security officer opening the door for me with a respectful, "Good morning, Dr. Hayes." As we drove through the quiet Saturday morning streets of Washington, I felt a strange sense of displacement, as if I had stepped into someone else's life. But this was my life now, the one I had built meticulously while everyone around me was looking elsewhere. The White House security procedures were extensive, but my new credentials moved me through efficiently. I was escorted to the Situation Room, a space I had only seen in photographs and news reports, where the most consequential national security decisions were made. The room was already half full when I arrived: uniformed military officials, intelligence directors, key cabinet members. I recognized faces from news coverage and security briefings, people whose decisions shaped global events. And now I would be briefing them. A staff member directed me to a seat near the middle of the table, not at the periphery where more junior officials sat. As I arranged my materials, I became aware of a familiar voice behind me. "Eleanor?" I turned to see my father, General Robert Hayes, standing in the doorway in full dress uniform, stars gleaming on his shoulders. His expression was one of utter confusion. "Dad," I acknowledged, keeping my voice professionally neutral. "What are you doing here?" he asked, moving closer, his voice lowered as if to avoid embarrassment. "This is a classified NSC meeting." "I know. I'm briefing it." He stared at me, clearly trying to reconcile the daughter who brought birthday cakes with the woman setting up a classified presentation in the Situation Room. Before he could respond, Director Clark entered. "General Hayes," he greeted my father. "I see you've already found Dr. Hayes." "Excellent. We'll be relying heavily on her assessment today." My father's confusion deepened. "Director, there must be some mistake. Eleanor is my daughter. She works in administrative support at the Pentagon." Director Clark raised an eyebrow. "No mistake, General. Dr. Hayes is the Deputy Director of Strategic Assessment and the architect of our most advanced threat identification system. That's why you were added to this meeting. I understood you were related and thought you'd be an appropriate military liaison for the implementation phase." The color drained slightly from my father's face. "I wasn't aware." "Apparently not," Director Clark replied, his tone suggesting this was an oversight on my father's part rather than mine. "Please take your seat. We're about to begin." My father moved to a chair on the opposite side of the table, his eyes never leaving me, as if seeing me for the first time. Perhaps he was. The president entered, and everyone stood. After brief introductions, he turned the meeting over to Director Clark, who introduced me. "Dr. Hayes will brief us on a critical security situation identified by Cassandra, the advanced pattern recognition system she developed." "Dr. Hayes?" I stood, activating the secure display screens around the room. "Mr. President, members of the National Security Council, Cassandra has identified a coordinated Chinese naval operation designed to establish de facto control of disputed territories in the South China Sea while evading conventional detection methods." For the next 30 minutes, I presented the evidence, the analytical methodology, and the strategic implications with absolute clarity and authority. I fielded questions from cabinet secretaries and military commanders, addressing complex technical and strategic points without hesitation. Throughout, I was aware of my father watching me, his expression evolving from shock to something like wonder. He had never seen this version of his daughter, confident, authoritative, brilliant. The invisible woman had finally stepped into the light, and she was blinding. When the briefing concluded, the president himself addressed me. "Dr. Hayes, your analysis is compelling and concerning. I'm authorizing immediate diplomatic and military responses based on your assessment. Please ensure Cassandra continues monitoring the situation and report any changes directly to this council." "Yes, Mr. President." As the meeting adjourned, officials gathered in small groups, discussing implementation details. My father approached slowly, as if unsure of his welcome. "Eleanor," he said, his voice different now, lacking its usual certainty. "I don't understand. How long have you been doing this work?" "The work? 15 years. The recognition? 3 days." He flinched slightly. "Why didn't you tell us? Would you have believed me?" I asked quietly. "Or would you have told me I was overreaching, that intelligence analysis isn't where real decisions happen, that I should stick to what I'm good at, organizing and supporting?" He had no answer, because we both knew the truth. Director Clark appeared at my side. "Dr. Hayes, the Joint Chiefs have requested an immediate follow-up briefing. They're assembling now." I nodded. "I'll be right there." My father stood straighter, military bearing reasserting itself. "I should join them. As liaison." "Actually, General," Director Clark interjected smoothly, "your presence is requested at the diplomatic coordination meeting. Dr. Hayes will handle the Joint Chiefs directly." The significance wasn't lost on either of us. My father, the career military commander who had always operated at the highest levels, was being directed to a secondary meeting. I, the daughter he had never seen as a leader, would be briefing the Joint Chiefs of Staff. "Of course," my father said, his voice carefully controlled. "Eleanor, Dr. Hayes, perhaps we could speak later." "I'll see what I can do," I replied, gathering my materials. National security matters are keeping my schedule rather unpredictable. As I walked away with Director Clark, I heard my father's phone ring. From his side of the conversation, I could tell it was my mother, wondering why he had missed his own birthday gathering. I didn't look back to see his expression as he explained that both he and I were in the White House Situation Room, dealing with a matter of urgent national security, and that I was the one leading the briefing. Some revelations need no witnesses. Their power lies in the moment when everything a person thought they knew is suddenly, irrevocably rewritten. For my father, that moment was now. And for me, it was the moment I finally understood that I had never actually been invisible. I had been overlooked by people who weren't looking in the right direction. The distinction mattered. As I entered the room where the Joint Chiefs of Staff waited for my guidance on a matter of global significance, I realized that visibility wasn't something others granted you. It was something you claimed for yourself when you refused to be defined by others. Limitations. Every person who had ever dismissed me had actually done me a favor. They had taught me to build strength that didn't need external validation, to develop expertise that spoke for itself, to create value that eventually became impossible to ignore. The Joint Chiefs rose as I entered the room. Not because I was a woman, not because I was a civilian, but because I was the expert whose assessment would shape their strategic decisions. As I took my place at the head of the table, I felt the weight of my hard-won authority settle comfortably on my shoulders. Gentlemen, I began, let's discuss how Cassandra will reshape our strategic posture. And they listened. Every one of them. Because expertise, once recognized, commands attention regardless of the path taken to achieve it. The week after the National Security Council meeting passed in a blur of briefings, system implementations, and strategic planning sessions. Cassandra was being integrated across intelligence agencies at an unprecedented pace, with teams working around the clock to connect data feeds and train analysts on the new paradigm. I moved through the Pentagon's corridors with a new kind of visibility. People stepped aside, conversations paused, eyes followed my progress with curiosity and sometimes apprehension. I hadn't spoken to my family since that Saturday in the Situation Room. My phone contained 17 unread messages and 5 voicemails, all variations on confusion, hurt feelings, and demands for explanation. I hadn't responded to any of them. Some transitions require space, both for the person changing and for those witnessing the change. On Friday afternoon, as I reviewed Cassandra's latest assessments in my new office, a spacious room with windows overlooking the Potomac and security features that would have seemed like science fiction a month ago, my assistant announced. A visitor. General Hayes is here to see you, Dr. Hayes. I took a deep breath, closing the classified files on my screen. Send him in. My father entered, his uniform impeccable as always, his posture military straight. But something was different. The confident authority that had defined him throughout my life seemed muted, replaced by an uncertainty I'd never witnessed before. Eleanor, he said, remaining near the door. Do you have a moment? Of course. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. Please sit. He did, his eyes taking in the office, the advanced technology, the security clearance displays, the view that signified status in Pentagon hierarchy. Impressive space. It serves its purpose. An awkward silence stretched between us, filled with decades of misalignment. Your mother is upset, he finally said. You missed my birthday, and you haven't returned any calls. I've been rather busy implementing a national security system. Yes, He cleared his throat. I see that now. Another silence, heavier than the first. Why didn't you tell us, Eleanor? All these years, why keep your work secret from your family? I considered deflecting, offering some diplomatic half-truth that would ease his discomfort without confronting the reality. But that would be reverting to the old Eleanor, the one who smoothed rough edges and managed others' emotions at the expense of her own truth. Because you wouldn't have believed me, I said simply. Or worse, you would have explained to me why my insights weren't as valuable as I thought, how pattern recognition isn't the same as real intelligence work, how I should focus on being a good support person rather than trying to operate at levels beyond my capability. He flinched. We wouldn't have, Dad, I interrupted gently. You did. Repeatedly. Every time I showed interest in strategic thinking or intelligence work. Every time I tried to share an insight or analysis. You and Mom and Marcus and Victoria, you all had very clear ideas about who I was and what I could contribute. And none of those ideas included briefing the president or developing a system that's now reshaping national security strategy. He looked down at his hands, decorated with the West Point ring he'd worn with pride for 40 years. I never meant to limit you. I know. But you did anyway. He nodded slowly, accepting this truth with the same discipline he'd applied to military assessments throughout his career. The Joint Chiefs have been talking about you. About Cassandra. It's revolutionary, what you've built. Thank you. I've served with most of those men for decades. They've never once mentioned my name in connection with innovative strategic thinking. But they've mentioned yours 3 times this week. A small, bemused smile crossed his face. My daughter, the one who out-patted the patterns, as Admiral Stafford put it. Something warmed in my chest, not because I needed his validation, but because he was finally seeing me clearly. Cassandra just reveals what's already there. Patterns. Hiding in plain sight. Like you were, he said quietly. Our eyes met, and for perhaps the first time, we saw each other without the distortion of expectations. I'd like to understand your work, he said. If you're willing to explain it. Not because I need to evaluate it or improve it, but because I'd like to know who my daughter really is. That evening, I took my father through a non-classified demonstration of Cassandra's basic methodology. As a career military strategist, he grasped the implications quickly, asking insightful questions that revealed both his intelligence and his genuine desire to understand. This would have changed everything in Desert Storm, he said at one point, staring at a pattern visualization. We had the data, but we couldn't see the relationships in time to act on them. That's exactly why I built it, I explained. Human analysts are brilliant, but they're limited by cognitive capacity and existing frameworks. Cassandra removes those limitations. As he prepared to leave, my father paused at the door. Your mother still wants you to call. And Victoria has some adjusting to do. She's having trouble reconciling her baby sister with the woman the Secretary of Defense quoted in this morning's briefing. I smiled slightly. They'll adapt. Or they won't. Either way, I'll still be who I am. He nodded, a new respect in his eyes. Yes, you will. He straightened, almost coming to attention. I'm proud of you, Eleanor. Not because of your title or your access level, but because you built something extraordinary while the rest of us were looking in the wrong direction. After he left, I stood at my window watching the lights of Washington glow against the darkening sky. My father's words were gratifying, but they weren't what moved me to tears. It was the realization that I no longer needed them. Somewhere along the way, while building Cassandra and fighting to be heard, I had built something else too, an unshakable confidence in my own worth that no external validation could enhance and no dismissal could diminish. The following Tuesday, Director Clark called me to his office. The South China Sea situation is evolving, he said without preamble. Cassandra's assessment was correct. Chinese vessels are establishing a blockade pattern around the disputed islands. The president has ordered a carrier group to the region as a show of force, but we need real-time intelligence assessment to prevent miscalculation. Cassandra is monitoring all movements and communications, I assured him. That's not enough. The president wants Cassandra's architect on site. He handed me a folder. You're being deployed to the USS Ronald Reagan as Special Intelligence Advisor to the 7th Fleet Commander. Wheels up from Andrews in 3 hours. I stared at the orders. Sir, I'm not field personnel. I've never deployed to a combat zone. Neither had I when I was first sent to assess a developing crisis, he replied. Sometimes the analyst who understands the pattern is more valuable than a dozen field operatives who don't. 3 hours. Later, I boarded a military transport aircraft, my go-bag hastily packed with essentials for a deployment of unknown duration. As the plane lifted off, carrying me toward a potential flashpoint between superpowers, I felt a strange calm. This was the ultimate expression of the expertise I'd built in silence, being sent to where the stakes were highest because my understanding was now recognized as indispensable. The flight to the USS Ronald Reagan took 14 hours, including a refueling stop and a final approach by helicopter to the carrier's deck. I'd never been on an aircraft carrier before, never experienced the controlled chaos of flight operations, the constant noise, the thousands of personnel moving with choreographed precision in a floating city of war. I was escorted directly to the command center, where Admiral Catherine Janeway, commander of the 7th Fleet, was overseeing operations. She was a legendary figure in naval circles, the first woman to command a carrier strike group and a strategist of remarkable insight. Dr. Hayes, she greeted me, not pausing in her review of tactical displays. Welcome aboard. I've been briefed on Cassandra and your analysis. I need your eyes on our current situation immediately. For the next 12 hours, I worked alongside the Admiral and her staff, integrating Cassandra's real-time analysis with tactical operations. Chinese vessels were executing exactly the pattern I had identified, creating a de facto territorial claim through coordinated movement that individually appeared innocent but collectively established control. They're counting on plausible deniability, I explained, highlighting movement patterns on the tactical display. Each vessel has a legitimate reason to be where it is, but together they're establishing a blockade that will be politically impossible to challenge once it's fully formed. Admiral Janeway studied the pattern. How long until the formation is complete? At current movement rates, 26 hours. She nodded once, decision made. Then we have 25 hours to disrupt it. She turned to her tactical officer. Prepare intercept courses for all vessels in Sector 3. We'll establish our own pattern, one that prevents theirs from completing without directly challenging any single vessel. I watched in fascination as she took Cassandra's analysis and translated it into operational terms with remarkable speed. You're creating a counter-pattern, I observed. Exactly. She gave me an appraising look. You have a strategic mind, Dr. Hayes. Not just analytical, but operational. That's rare in intelligence specialists. I grew up in a military family, I explained. Strategy discussions were our dinner conversation. Ah, she nodded. Military brat? Which branch? Army. My father is General Robert Hayes. Her eyebrows rose slightly. The Robert Hayes? Former CENTCOM deputy commander? Yes. I served under him briefly during the Gulf War. Brilliant tactical commander. She studied me with new interest. He must be proud to have you carrying on the family tradition of service. I smiled faintly. It's a recent development. Over the next 3 days, I worked directly with Admiral Janeway as the carrier group executed a complex dance of deterrence with Chinese vessels. Cassandra continuously updated its assessment as new data flowed in, allowing us to anticipate movements and counter-threat with precision. On the 4th day, as we sat in her ready room reviewing the latest intelligence, Admiral Janeway asked the question I'd been expecting. Why did the DNI send you personally? You could have managed. Cassandra's implementation from Washington. I considered my answer carefully. Because Cassandra isn't just software. It's a methodology, a way of seeing relationships that traditional analysis misses. Director Clark believed that having me here would allow for real-time interpretation. That couldn't be achieved remotely. She nodded slowly. He was right. She leaned back in her chair, studying me. You know, in 30 years of naval service, I've learned that the most valuable asset in any crisis isn't technology or firepower. It's the right person with the right insight at the right moment. Cassandra provides the insight, I demurred. Cassandra is a tool. A brilliant one, but still a tool. You're the architect who understands not just what it shows but why it matters. She tapped her fingers thoughtfully on her desk. The Chinese are adjusting their approach. They've recognized our counterpattern and are developing a new strategy. Will Cassandra catch it? Yes, but interpretation will be critical. Their adaptations will be subtle at first. Then I need you where the decisions are made. She made a note on her tablet. I'm designating you as Special Intelligence Advisor, with direct access to command decisions. When Cassandra speaks, I want its creator translating. That evening, as I prepared for bed in my small officer's quarters, my secure phone chimed with an incoming message. It was from Director Clark. Chinese Foreign Ministry requesting emergency consultation. Your assessment has been proven correct at highest levels. President wants you back in Washington for NSC strategy session. Transport departing 0600. The next morning, as I prepared to board the helicopter that would take me from the carrier, Admiral Janeway met me on the flight deck. Dr. Hayes, she called over the roar of engines, the Joint Chiefs are assembling a special task force on emerging pattern-based threats. I've recommended you to lead the intelligence component. I felt a surge of both pride and determination. I'd be honored, Admiral. She nodded once, professional rather than emotional. Your father once told me that true strategic advantage comes from seeing what others miss. Now I understand he was describing his daughter's work, not his own. The helicopter lifted off the carrier deck, rising above the massive naval formation, spread across the South China Sea. From this height, the pattern was visible even to the naked eye, American vessels positioned precisely to counter Chinese encroachment, maintaining freedom of navigation through strategic presence rather than direct confrontation. It was strategy made visible, power expressed through position rather than force. And it had begun with a pattern I'd identified when no one else was looking. The flight back to Washington took nearly 20 hours. I slept fitfully, my mind processing the rapid evolution of my professional reality. 3 weeks ago, I had been just a secretary ordering sandwiches for Admiral Patterson. Now I was returning from a combat zone deployment to brief the National Security Council on a crisis I had predicted and helped manage. When we landed at Andrews Air Force Base, a government car was waiting to take me directly to the White House. I had no time to change from my rumpled travel clothes or prepare additional materials. Events were moving too quickly. The situation Room was already full when I arrived: the President, National Security Advisor, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, Director Clark, and the Joint Chiefs, including my father. All rose when I entered, a mark of respect that still felt foreign. "Dr. Hayes," the President greeted me. "Welcome back. We need your assessment immediately." For the next hour, I briefed the nation's leadership on the South China Sea situation, Cassandra's analysis of Chinese intentions, and Admiral Janeway's strategic countermeasures. I presented with clarity and confidence, fielding complex questions with the authority of someone who had been in the command center where decisions were being implemented. When I finished, the President turned to the Secretary of State. "Based on Dr. Hayes' assessment, proceed with the diplomatic approach we discussed. Make it clear that we've identified their pattern and are prepared to maintain our counterpositioning indefinitely." "Yes, Mr. President." The meeting continued. Strategy forming around the framework Cassandra had provided and my interpretation had clarified. I contributed when needed, my voice now an expected part of the highest-level national security conversation. Near the end of the session, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs addressed me directly. "Dr. Hayes, Admiral Janeway has proposed a permanent pattern recognition task force under Joint Command, with you as civilian director. The President has approved the concept. Are you prepared to build this capability from the ground up?" I felt the weight of every eye in the room, including my father's. This wasn't just a promotion or a new assignment. It was the creation of an entirely new capability within our national security architecture, with me at its center. "Yes, sir," I responded. "I've been preparing for this my entire career, whether others recognized it or not." A subtle ripple of reaction moved through the room, recognition of both the capability I offered and the implied critique of systems that had failed to see it sooner. After the meeting adjourned, my father approached as I gathered my materials. "The Joint Chiefs stood when you entered," he observed quietly. "Protocol for senior briefers in the Situation Room," I replied. "No," he corrected gently. "They stood for you, Eleanor. For what you've built and what you represent. I've been in hundreds of these meetings. That doesn't happen for protocol." I looked up at him, this man whose approval I had sought for decades, and whose limitations I had finally outgrown. "Does that surprise you?" "It did," he admitted. "It doesn't anymore." He straightened slightly, military bearing reasserting itself. "Your mother is hosting dinner Sunday. The whole family will be there. She's hoping you can attend, though she understands if national security takes precedence." The subtle shift in his words wasn't lost on me. No longer was family obligation the assumed priority. My work had finally been recognized as essential, even by those who had most persistently minimized it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe. And turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.